Chapter 1. Unexpected Assistance on the Voyage. The silence of space was a comfort to Captain Ryland Slate. He was used to the vast expanse, the darkness dotted with distant stars, and the quiet hum of his ship, the Valiant Wing. Solo travel was what he did best. Out here, there were no politics, no alien bureaucracies, just the thrill of exploration and the freedom of the open void. It was supposed to be a routine trip, a simple cargo delivery to the outer colonies. But halfway through the journey, his scanners picked up a distress signal, a faint pulse from an old vessel that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The signature was weak, and the ship's ID was unrecognizable. Against his better judgment, curiosity got the best of him. He changed course, heading towards the drifting relic. As he approached, the ship came into view. A sleek, metallic frame battered and scarred, yet still holding together. The markings on its hull were alien, ones he didn't recognize, though his system identified it as originating from a distant system known for its fierce isolationist policies. Whoever was inside might not be friendly, but the distress signal was clear, almost desperate. Ryland docked the Valiant Wing alongside the derelict ship and donned his pressure suit. The airlock hissed open, and he stepped aboard the alien vessel. Shadows played along the narrow corridor, and the flickering lights gave it an eerie, ghostly quality. He swept his flashlight over the walls, scanning for any signs of life. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the hum of the ship's remaining life support systems. Then, he heard a faint shuffling sound, almost like someone shifting in place. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing down the empty hall. No response. He continued forward cautiously, his hand resting on the blaster strapped to his hip. Then, in the dim light, he saw her. She was small, delicate-looking, with soft lavender skin that shimmered under the faint light. Her eyes were large, almost luminescent, and fixed on him with a mixture of fear and hope. She was wearing a tattered jumpsuit, and her long, silvery hair was tangled and matted, hinting at days or weeks spent in isolation. "Who are you?" he asked, lowering his weapon slightly. "What are you doing here?" The alien girl took a hesitant step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Nera. I was trying to escape. Please, I mean you no harm." Ryland studied her, noting the exhaustion in her posture, the desperation in her gaze. She didn't look like a threat. In fact, she looked like someone who had been through a lot, maybe even on the run. He debated for a moment, then decided to take a chance. "Come on," he said, gesturing for her to follow. "I'll get you to my ship. We can talk there." She hesitated, as if weighing his offer, then nodded. Together, they made their way back to the Valiant Wing, and once on board, he guided her to the small mess hall, offering her a seat and a ration bar. She accepted it gratefully, biting into the bar with an intensity that suggested she hadn't eaten in days. "Thank you," she murmured between bites, her eyes never leaving him. "I wasn't sure if anyone would come. I thought I'd die out there." Ryland leaned back, crossing his arms. "So, you're a stowaway?" She looked down, a hint of shame crossing her face. "I had no choice. I had to get away. From them." "Them?" he prompted. Nera glanced up, her eyes shadowed with a fear that seemed to go beyond simple danger. "My people. They wanted me for my skills, but I refused. I was just a technician, nothing more. But they wouldn't let me go." Her vague explanation piqued Ryland's curiosity. "A technician, huh? So, what kind of skills are we talking about?" For the first time, a small smile touched her lips. "I know my way around ships," she said, her tone almost teasing. "I can repair engines, optimize systems, even run maintenance. I'm useful if you'll let me stay." Ryland raised an eyebrow, considering her offer. He had planned to travel alone, but having an extra pair of hands, especially one with technical knowledge, might not be such a bad idea. And besides, there was something about her that intrigued him, a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength. "All right, Nera," he said finally. "You can stay, but only if you pull your weight. I don't have time for freeloaders." Her eyes lit up, a spark of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I won't let you down." The next few days were an adjustment, to say the least. Nera was surprisingly efficient, taking on tasks without complaint and even finding ways to streamline operations Ryland hadn't considered. She She had a knack for understanding systems, adjusting power flow, tweaking energy levels, and recalibrating sensors with an ease that left Ryland both impressed and slightly wary. One evening, while Ryland was checking the ship's course, he noticed a faint whirring sound coming from the control panel. Frowning, he opened it up, only to find Nera's slender hands already inside, her fingers deftly working through a maze of wires and circuits. "What are you doing?" he asked, more surprised than angry. She looked up, her expression calm. "I noticed a slight imbalance in the power flow. I'm rerouting it to improve the efficiency of your thrusters." Ryland was taken aback. "I didn't even know there was an imbalance." She shrugged, a faint smile on her lips. "It's a subtle thing. Most wouldn't notice." He watched as she finished her adjustments, feeling a mix of respect and curiosity. "You weren't just a technician, were you?" Her expression faltered, and for a moment, he thought she might brush off the question. But then she sighed, as if resigning herself to share a piece of her past. "No," she admitted quietly. "I was more than that. I worked on sensitive projects, things my people wanted to keep secret. That's why they won't let me go. They're afraid I might tell someone, or worse, use what I know against them." Ryland frowned, realizing the depth of her predicament. She wasn't just running from a job, she was escaping a life controlled by those who saw her as a tool, a valuable resource they weren't willing to let slip away. He felt a surge of empathy for her, along with a protective instinct he hadn't anticipated. "Well, you're safe here," he said, trying to reassure her. "No one's going to find you on this ship." Nera's eyes softened, and she nodded, a hint of gratitude in her gaze. "Thank you, Ryland. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." As days turned into weeks, Nera continued to make herself invaluable, offering extra services in ways that Ryland hadn't anticipated. She adjusted the ship's shields to handle high-intensity solar storms, reprogrammed the navigation to avoid potential pirate zones, and even managed to improve the ship's fuel efficiency. Every day, Ryland found himself more impressed with her capabilities and more curious about the secrets she carried. But with each improvement, he also noticed something else. Nera seemed to be building something, piece by piece, within the ship systems. He couldn't quite place it, but he had a feeling she was preparing for something, maybe even a confrontation she knew was inevitable. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain. Nera was far more than she appeared, and her presence on his ship was about to take them both down a path they couldn't turn back from. Chapter 2. Beyond simple cleaning duties. Nera had become a constant presence aboard the Valiant Wing, and Ryland had to admit, life on the ship was a lot easier with her around. Not only was she efficient, but she also possessed an uncanny sense of what the ship needed. Systems were operating better than ever. Fuel consumption was down, power allocation had been streamlined, and even minor components seemed to hum with newfound vigor. But something else had shifted, too. Where once the quiet of space had felt peaceful to him, now it felt hollow. He'd grown used to the sight of Nera darting around, her lavender skin catching the faint glimmer of the ship's lights as she worked. She had a way of moving, precise and delicate, that he couldn't help but notice. Still, Ryland kept his guard up. He wasn't sure what he had allowed into his life, nor was he entirely convinced of her intentions. Every now and then, he'd catch her studying him with an intensity that suggested she was waiting for something. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was a depth to her gaze, as though she was appraising him for a purpose she hadn't yet revealed. As the days passed, Nera continued to extend her extra services, as she liked to call them, which went well beyond cleaning. One evening, as Ryland was working on the ship's navigation logs, he heard her voice behind him. "I was thinking," she began hesitantly, "about reprogramming your defensive systems." He turned in his seat, eyebrows raised. "Reprogramming? Those systems are fine as they are. They've kept me safe this long." She smiled, a little sadly. "They're fine for standard travel, yes? But if you ever encounter a hostile ship, you'd want something more sophisticated." "And you know how to do that?" he asked, curious. "Yes," she replied, nodding with certainty. "I can create an automated response system that could counter incoming projectiles before they even hit you. It's a technique I learned back home. You wouldn't have to worry about reaction time. It would all be taken care of automatically." Ryland considered her proposal, impressed but wary. "Why would I need a defense system that advanced?" Nera looked down, her expression momentarily clouded. Because there may come a time when someone will come after me, and I don't want you to be unprepared. Her confession lingered in the air between them, and for a moment, Ryland saw past her calm exterior. Beneath the collected surface, there was a deep fear and almost desperate need to stay hidden, to remain safe. All right, he said, nodding slowly. Do what you need to. If you think it'll keep us safe, I trust you. Her expression brightened, and she immediately set to work, her fingers moving deftly over the console as she began rewriting code and reconfiguring the ship systems. Ryland watched her work, amazed by her proficiency. It was as if she could see the entire system in her mind, knowing exactly where to tweak and adjust. Hours passed, and eventually, Nera stepped back from the console, a satisfied smile on her face. There, she said, wiping a stray strand of silver hair from her face. That should do it. Ryland examined the display, noting the changes she had made. The system was now far more complex, with layered defenses that would activate in sequence if the ship was under attack. He glanced at her, a question forming in his mind. You've done this before, haven't you? Worked on defense systems, I mean? She nodded, her expression growing distant. Yes. My people value defense and secrecy above all else. I was trained in technology from a young age, but they took it further. They pushed me to become an asset. Her words carried a weight that Ryland didn't miss. He had a feeling there was more to her story than she was letting on, but he decided not to press. She would tell him when she was ready. For now, he was grateful for her expertise, even if it came with strings attached. As the weeks went on, Nera continued to integrate herself into the ship's operations. She optimized the life support systems, adjusted the energy reserves, and even recalibrated the temperature settings, creating a more comfortable environment. Ryland hadn't realized how much of his own comfort he had sacrificed for efficiency's sake until she began making these changes. One night, after finishing a meal in the mess hall, Nera joined him, sitting across from him with a thoughtful expression. "You're a wanderer, aren't you?" she asked suddenly, her gaze steady and probing. Ryland blinked, taken aback by the question. "What makes you say that? You seem untethered, as if you're always searching for something, but never quite finding it." Her observation hit close to home. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. She had seen right through him, seen the restlessness he tried to bury beneath the endless stretches of space travel. "Maybe I am," he admitted quietly, "but that's just part of the job. Space is vast. There's always something new to find, someplace I haven't seen yet." Nera nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I understand. I, too, was always searching. For freedom, for a life beyond the confines of duty. That's why I had to leave." Her voice softened, and for the first time, Ryland sensed a vulnerability she had been careful to hide. She was not just a runaway, nor merely a skilled technician. She was someone who had sacrificed everything for a chance at a life of her own choosing. "Well," he said, offering her a reassuring smile, "you've got that chance now. As long as you're on my ship, you're free." A moment of silence passed between them, and Ryland saw her eyes soften, gratitude flickering in their depths. But as much as he wanted to believe in the simplicity of his words, he knew things were rarely that easy. He sensed that her past would catch up to them sooner or later. And when it did, he'd need to be ready. Days turned into weeks, and Nera's improvements to the Valiant Wing transformed it into a ship Ryland barely recognized. It was faster, more responsive, and capable of handling far more than he had ever anticipated. She even added a stealth module, something he didn't even know the ship could support. And with every upgrade, she seemed to grow more comfortable, her presence becoming a fixture in his life. She would join him for meals, share stories about her home, and sometimes, late at night, she'd tell him about the stars as she saw them. Her perspective was different, almost poetic, and Ryland found himself captivated by her descriptions. But one night, something shifted. Ryland woke to the sound of faint whirring and clicking from the main control room. He slipped out of bed, instinctively reaching for his blaster as he moved silently down the corridor. As he approached the control room, he saw Nera hunched over the main panel, her hands working quickly, almost feverishly. "Nera," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She froze, her shoulders tensing before she turned to face him, her eyes wide and guilty. I didn't mean for you to see this." Ryland glanced past her to the panel, where he saw an unfamiliar schematic glowing on the screen. It was a detailed map of the ship, with certain sections highlighted, sections he didn't recognize. "What is this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nera looked down, a mixture of shame and resolve in her expression. "It's something I've been working on. I wanted to ensure you had all the defenses you'd need. And a backup escape route, in case anything happens." Ryland studied her, a strange mix of anger and understanding bubbling within him. She had been making plans, preparing for something she hadn't told him about. "You're expecting trouble, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low. Nera nodded slowly. "Yes, they'll come for me eventually. I thought, if I could fortify the ship, maybe I could protect you too." Her confession hung heavy in the air, and Ryland felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She had put him in danger without telling him, and yet, she was doing everything in her power to ensure his safety as well. He took a deep breath, the anger subsiding as he met her gaze. "All right, Nera. If trouble comes, we'll face it together. But from now on, no more secrets. We're a team. Got it?" She nodded, a small smile breaking through the tension in her expression. "Got it." As he looked into her eyes, Ryland realized that this strange, unexpected partnership was becoming something he hadn't anticipated. And as much as he knew it was dangerous, he couldn't deny the excitement coursing through him. Because out here, in the vast emptiness of space, he had finally found something worth fighting for. Chapter 3. Secrets Unveiled. Days blurred together as the valiant wing sailed through the quiet vastness of space. Ryland found himself adapting to life with Nera aboard. Her presence was more than helpful. It was transformative. The ship felt sharper, more alive, as if it responded to her touch. The thrusters hummed at a slightly higher pitch, the control panels gleamed under her meticulous care, and the entire vessel seemed to run smoother than he had ever remembered. Still, despite her value as a crew member, Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that Nera was hiding something. She had hinted at a troubled past and at her reasons for leaving her people, but every time he tried to press further, she changed the subject. He respected her privacy, but the more she modified the ship with advanced systems and defenses, the more he sensed there was something far deeper than a mere technician's skills at play. One evening, while Ryland was running diagnostics, he noticed an unfamiliar sequence in the system logs. It was a code he didn't recognize, a complicated, almost artful blend of algorithms that he hadn't installed. Frowning, he tried to trace it back to its origin, but found only more layers of encrypted commands. "Nera," he called, hoping she would have an explanation. She appeared at his side, her expression calm and collected, though he could see a faint tension in her eyes. "What's this code here?" he asked, gesturing to the screen. "It's nothing I put in, and it's sophisticated. More advanced than anything I've seen in standard tech." Her gaze flickered to the screen, and she took a slow, steadying breath before looking back at him. "Ryland, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the start." He straightened, his attention focused on her. "I'm listening." Nera hesitated, her hands clasped tightly as if to steady herself. "You already know I was a technician, but my role wasn't just maintaining ships or optimizing systems. I was part of a special Program A classified project that my people developed to give us an advantage in delicate operations." Ryland felt a surge of unease, though he kept his voice even. "What kind of operations?" She looked away, her voice soft. "They trained us to manipulate technology, to integrate ourselves into the systems we worked on. I became what they called an integration specialist, capable of not only understanding technology but controlling it. I was assigned to military-grade systems, advanced defensive protocols, and weapons development." The words hung heavy between them, and Ryland's mind raced as he pieced together the implications. "So, your people see you as a weapon?" Nera's shoulders sagged, and her gaze dropped. "Yes, I am, to them, a valuable asset. I know too much. I know their secrets, their weaknesses. When I tried to leave, they saw it as a betrayal, something they couldn't risk. They sent trackers after me, and, if they find me, they'll take me back. Or worse." Her voice broke slightly, and Ryland saw a vulnerability in her that cut through his reservations. She wasn't just a stowaway or an escapee. She was someone who had been stripped of her freedom and forced into a role she never wanted. "And that's why you've been making all these modifications to my ship?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her expression solemn. "Yes. I didn't want to put you at risk, so I thought if I could make your ship strong enough, fast enough, maybe we'd stand a chance if they ever found us." Ryland absorbed her words, a wave of sympathy and respect rising within him. She had taken great risks, not only to protect herself, but to shield him from the danger that followed her. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally, his voice gentle. "But if they come, we'll face them together. You're not alone anymore, Nera." She looked up at him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, as if his words had lifted a weight from her shoulders. I can't thank you enough, Ryland. I didn't expect kindness." A small smile crept onto his face. "Then you've been running from the wrong people." Their moment of connection was interrupted by a sudden, shrill alarm blaring from the control panel. Ryland's smile faded as he turned to the console, his stomach sinking as he saw the proximity alert flashing red. 3 unidentified ships had appeared on the radar, closing in on their position at a rapid pace. "They're here," Nera whispered, her face paling. Ryland clenched his jaw, his mind already racing through their options. "Can we outrun them?" She shook her head. "They're using long-range tracking systems. Once they have a target, they don't lose it easily." "But," her eyes lit up with an idea, "I can deploy a decoy. It's a projection I programmed to mimic the Valiant Wing's energy signature. It should lead them away, but we'll have to move fast." "Do it," he said, without hesitation. Nera's hands flew over the controls as she activated the decoy sequence. Within moments, a holographic duplicate of the Valiant Wing appeared on the radar, moving in the opposite direction. The enemy ships adjusted their course, following the decoy at full speed. Ryland exhaled a sigh of relief as they veered off in the other direction, steering the ship carefully to avoid detection. But before they could get too far, one of the enemy ships broke formation, circling back toward their true position. "They're not falling for it," Ryland muttered, gripping the controls. "Looks like we'll have to fight." Nera's eyes were focused, her jaw set with determination. "I've enhanced the ship's defense systems and automated targeting. If we're lucky, we can disable their weapons before they get too close." He nodded, preparing himself as the enemy ship closed in. "Let's hope your modifications are as good as you say they are." The enemy vessel fired, sending a barrage of energy blasts streaking toward them. But thanks to Nera's upgraded shields, the blasts dissipated harmlessly, absorbed by the energy buffer she had installed. Ryland maneuvered the Valiant Wing, weaving through space as Nera calibrated their targeting systems. "Now!" she shouted, pressing a sequence of commands that launched a counterattack. The Valiant Wing's cannons fired, hitting the enemy ship's engines with precision. Sparks erupted from their adversary's hull as the blasts found their mark, causing the ship to shudder and fall back. But they weren't safe yet. The remaining 2 ships had picked up their trail again, closing in with renewed determination. Ryland's heart pounded as he calculated their odds, knowing that their chances of surviving a direct confrontation were slim. "Nera, is there anything else we can do?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. She bit her lip, her gaze fixed on the approaching ships. "There's one more option, but it's risky. I could trigger a power surge that will cloak us completely, but it'll drain most of our energy reserves. We'll be invisible, but it'll take time to recharge the systems afterward." Ryland didn't hesitate. "Do it. It's our best shot." Nera nodded, initiating the sequence. The lights on the Valiant Wing dimmed as the ship's power was rerouted to activate the cloaking field. For a tense moment, everything went dark, and they drifted in silence, invisible to the enemy ships. The 2 pursuers flew past, scanning the area with no sign of their target. Ryland held his breath, watching as they searched fruitlessly before finally veering off, disappearing into the distance. Once they were out of range, Nera released the cloak, and the ship's systems began to power back up. They sat in silence for a long moment, the tension finally easing as they realized they had evaded their pursuers. Ryland turned to Nera, his heart pounding with both relief and admiration. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Nera looked back at him, a faint smile on her face. "We did it, Ryland. Together. As the lights flickered back to full power, Ryland felt a surge of respect for the alien girl who had not only saved his life, but had become a partner he hadn't expected. Her bravery, her skill, and her willingness to fight for her freedom had shown him a side of her he hadn't fully understood before. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew this was only the beginning. Her past was a storm that still loomed on the horizon, and while they had escaped this battle, they both knew the war was far from over. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The tension between Ryland and Nera was palpable as the valiant wing drifted in the silence that followed their close encounter. They had evaded their pursuers, but both knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The system scans showed that the two enemy ships were not far behind, circling back to pick up their trail. Their earlier victory had bought them time, but they needed a new plan and quickly. Ryland checked the energy reserves. The cloaking maneuver had drained more power than anticipated, leaving them with limited options for offense or defense. They had to be strategic, and with every second ticking away, he felt the urgency mounting. Nera glanced at him, her face a mixture of determination and fear. Ryland, I have one last idea, but it's dangerous. His eyes met hers, sensing the weight of her words. What is it? She took a deep breath. We can use the ship's remaining power to create an overload in the engine core. If we time it right, we can unleash a blast that will knock them out of commission. But it'll leave us without propulsion. We'll be stranded until we can recharge. He processed her plan, knowing it was a gamble. They'd be immobilized and vulnerable, floating in space with no means of escape. But if it worked, it would disable their attackers long enough to escape and live to see another day. It's risky, he said, searching her gaze. But I trust you. A faint smile touched her lips, a spark of relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, Ryland. I won't let you down. They moved swiftly, each performing tasks with practiced efficiency. Ryland rerouted the power systems, directing energy to the engine core while Nera calibrated the overload controls. She worked with the calm precision he had come to admire, fingers dancing over the control panel as she prepared the sequence. Ryland couldn't help but marvel at her skill, realizing that her training had prepared her for moments exactly like this. Finally, Nera looked up, her expression resolute. It's ready. Once I trigger the overload, we'll have seconds before the blast. I'll need you to steer us just far enough to avoid the shockwave. He nodded, taking his place at the controls. His grip tightened on the steering, eyes focused on the radar as he watched the two enemy ships closing in. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's do this. Nera hit the activation switch, and the engine core began to hum with an intensity that sent vibrations through the entire ship. The enemy ships grew larger on the radar, unaware of the trap set for them. Ryland's heart pounded as he steered the valiant wing slightly off course, positioning them just outside the blast radius. Now, Nera, he called out. She pressed the final command, and a surge of energy erupted from the engine core, sending a massive shockwave into space. The blast rippled out in a brilliant arc, striking the two enemy ships before they could react. Both ships shuddered under the impact, their systems sparking and flickering as the overload scrambled their electronics. One of the ships began to spin out of control, veering off into the distance, while the other hung motionless, crippled by the blast. Ryland exhaled, the tension leaving his body as he watched their enemies disabled. But his relief was short-lived. The valiant wing shuddered, its lights flickering as the energy reserves dropped to near zero. We're offline, Nera said, her voice barely a whisper. The blast took out our remaining power. Ryland tried the controls, but they were unresponsive. They were stranded, adrift in the middle of hostile space with no propulsion, no shields, and no means of escape. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the reality of their situation settling in. Ryland could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, but when he glanced over at Nera, he saw a look of quiet resolve on her face. I'm sorry, she said, her voice filled with regret. I didn't mean for it to end like this. He shook his head, offering her a reassuring smile. We did what we had to do, and we're still alive, aren't we? We'll find a way out of this. Nera looked away, her gaze distant. There's something else. Something I didn't tell you. His brow furrowed, but he remained silent, letting her continue. My people. They implanted a tracking device in me before I left. It's dormant, but if activated, it would send out a distress signal, alerting anyone nearby. Ryland's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. You mean, we could use it to signal for help? She nodded, though her expression was grim. Yes, but it's risky. If they intercept it, they'll come for me, and they'll take me back. I don't know what they'll do to you. He considered her words, understanding the danger but unwilling to leave her behind. We're in this together, Nera. If that's our only option, then we'll take it. Her gaze softened, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. Thank you, Ryland. I never expected to find someone who would stand by me like this. He reached out, taking her hand in his. You're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. With a final nod, Nera activated the tracking device, her fingers trembling slightly as she entered the sequence. The device emitted a faint signal, broadcasting their location into the void. They waited in tense silence, the minutes stretching on as they drifted in the vast emptiness. Ryland's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and fear, each second bringing them closer to either salvation or capture. Nera's hand remained in his, her presence a steady anchor in the uncertainty of their fate. After what felt like an eternity, a response pinged on the radar. Ryland's heart leapt as he saw the faint blip of an approaching ship, a civilian freighter, judging by its signature. Relief washed over him, but he saw Nera's face grow pale as the freighter grew closer. It could still be a trap, she whispered, her voice filled with dread. Ryland squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. If it is, we'll face it. Together. The freighter docked alongside them, and a voice crackled over the comms. This is Captain Alden of the Stellar Falcon. We received your distress signal. Are you in need of assistance? Ryland breathed a sigh of relief, exchanging a look with Nera before replying. Yes, Captain. We're stranded and could use a tow. Any help would be appreciated. The docking hatch opened, and a crew of humans and aliens boarded, assessing the situation. Captain Alden, a rugged older man with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Ryland and Nera, his gaze shifting between them. You two are lucky we were in the area, he said, a faint smile breaking through his stern expression. But you're safe now. We'll get you back on your feet. Nera's shoulders relaxed, a wave of relief washing over her as the freighter's crew began transferring power to the Valiant Wing. She turned to Ryland, a grateful smile on her face. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You risked everything to help me. Ryland chuckled, a warmth in his gaze. I didn't do it for thanks, Nera. I did it because, well, I can't imagine this ship without you. They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their journey and their narrow escape settling over them. They had faced unimaginable danger, but they had survived. And in that survival, they had found something neither of them had expected: a partnership, a bond forged in the crucible of danger and trust. As the Valiant Wing hummed back to life, Ryland and Nera prepared for the next leg of their journey. There would be more challenges ahead, and her past might catch up with them again. But for now, they were free together in the vast expanse of space, ready to face whatever lay beyond the stars.